The first fragrance that I ever reviewed on this channel was this one, Mancera Cedrat Blasé, and that was no accident. I absolutely love this fragrance, and despite it getting a lot of hype, it's still one of my most worn fragrances over the last few years. But then in 2021, we saw the teasing release of a new flanker to this with the Intense Cedrat Blasé. This now has become more widely available across the globe, and I have my hands on it here and have been wearing it for the past couple of weeks, so I feel more comfortable with it. And I want to talk about what I think of it, talk about the scent, its performance, how it compares to the original, and finally, is it all worth it? So as previously mentioned, Cedrat Blasé Intense first started to make waves in 2021 as it started to show up in select markets around the globe as a follow-up to the acclaimed original. The bottle comes in two different sizes, one in 60 ml for $110 and the larger 120 ml bottle that I have here for $200, making it about $15 to $20 more expensive than the original. For concentration, this is marketed as an extrait de parfum, and you will also see the messaging on the front of the bottle. One note though about the concentration. On the bottom of the bottle, by the batch code, I did notice that it does say eau de parfum, which I did find a tad bit confusing. This bottle is from an authorized seller, so no discounters, and I know that this one is authentic. But again, I did find this a little bit confusing. And I did want to double check myself to see if there was other people out there that were having the same issue, and it seemed like there were just a few out there in the forums. The bottle and its presentation are standard Mancera, offering a dense glass bottle with its magnetic cap and solid atomizer that offers a healthy spread when spraying. But now let's talk about the scent. First, as its own experience, I don't want to get into the details about how this one compares just yet, so I'll have more of that later, how it compares to the original. So with this fragrance, as the name would suggest, is a combination of citrus and woods, and for the most part, it is very similar to the original. Off the top, you do notice a strong yet not overpowering citrus that is rounded off, just like the original, with some bitterness with the blackcurrant and spices. So this opening of citrus persists really strongly for about 20 to 30 minutes before the woods of the fragrance start to take over in combination with the very strong leather note that is much easier to discern from the original or previous version. Some of the other listed notes in the mid from Mancera are patchouli, leather, jasmine, oud, and sandalwood, many of which remain as this one gets deeper into its dry down. To close, we have notes of musk, vanilla, and oak moss, but again, as this dries down, this takes more of a woodsy and leathery turn to my nose than really musk and vanilla. I would say those are the two most prominent, those combination of woods and in that leather note. Now speaking to performance, for the Intense here, it's very solid. 7 to 9 hours of performance on my skin. Note, I have only tested this in the summer with solid projection for the first 2 hours. Just to provide a little anecdote, I was in a conference room at my company and we were having meetings and someone made a comment who was just kind of in close quarters with me, but not so overly close. It said, "I don't know what you're wearing, but that is crazy strong." I don't know if this counts as a compliment. It was more like, tone it down, buddy. But still, I think that goes to show that the performance projection, really solid. I did spray it midday to reapply, but this was late in the afternoon. So we're talking about 3 hours in and people were still having that reaction. I think generally you are not going to have to worry about performance being an issue here. Given how the citrus dissipates quicker than the previous version, I do think this one might be less prime for summer, but more viable for the fall, spring, and winter. And I think in general, people are gonna have no problem with the performance here. But now let's talk about how this one compares to the original. So a couple things first. I've been wearing this for around 2 weeks, and many of those days when I was wearing this, I also had this on one arm and then I had this on the other. So I was strongly trying to think about comparing these two fragrances. A couple major takeaways. To begin, what bottle do I have of the original? This is one of the older batches, so it has the screwed cap, not the magnetic cap that they shifted over to, so keep that in mind. I am talking about my experience with an older bottle compared to some of the newer batches, which, you know, never know with fragrances and how things change. But a couple things. One is, do I think these are remarkably different? No, I would say for most untrained noses, this is going to smell, for the most part, pretty much the same. Now, they are different though at the same time, and where I would say they're the most different is going to be two areas. One is going to be with the opening. For the original, this had a much more juicy, fruity opening, which some people may have found as off-putting, but I do think that was one of the defining characteristics of the original. Now that is still there for the new Intense version in terms of some subtlety with that opening of citrus and having a fruity tone to it. But what I notice is it goes away much quicker and it's never as intense as it was with the original. And what I find what happens with this one is the citrus dissipates much quicker than it does here. I think this on the original stayed a little bit longer. And then as this dries down, you quickly are going to get those woods, which I think emphatically come out a little bit stronger. This was mostly based on cedar. This I find is a bit spicier. It has a bit more zing to it in its woods. Also not going to be as creamy. I think you'll also notice that the original for me was sweeter. This is not as sweet. Even from the initial opening with the fruity type of blast off the top, all the way to the base, this new intense version doesn't have that same level of sweetness. The original was very much a woody fragrance, but it took a while for it to show itself how much of a woody fragrance it was. This one becomes more apparent right away, or maybe not right away, but within the first, say, 15 to 30 minutes, you have an idea on the road that you're going down. And without the same amount of citrus off the top, I think it's a good indication also that this one is shifting from the original. But again, they are very similar. Another point that I will talk about is the performance. Now, I, just as my base data point here when talking about this, found the performance of the original to be fantastic. I can't really ask much more of a fragrance that has a citrus opening and a woody base. To have all of these citrus molecules as part of the DNA of a fragrance and still have some good performance and projection, that's pretty much a dream scenario for me. I love citrus-oriented fragrances, and have some wood backing that's going to allow it to have some staying power. It's amazing. So I was always getting good performance out of the original in the first place. So just use that as a data point. And now shifting over to this one, I think the performance is pretty comparable, but that's not a bad thing. The only thing I will add here is that when you see the word intense, your brain automatically goes into a certain area. It thinks that this is going to be a beast of a performer. And although I would say that you might have to be a tad more careful with wearing this in the summer months compared to something like this, I do think ultimately the performance at the end of the day is relatively similar. Now again, I will reference that this is an older bottle, so I don't know if things have changed because I haven't sampled one of the later batches of Cedrat Boisé with the EDP version. But just based on my previous experience of wearing this one a lot, I do find the performance to be kind of in the same ballpark, and it was harder for me to find a difference. And I went wearing one on one arm versus the other, so I really tried to test this out. And then for price, I don't think there really is enough of a difference where I could say that, hey, this is a deal breaker because this is so much more expensive. I think if you're trying to think about looking at these fragrances and looking at the price of this, I think it is appropriately priced. Mancera typically just knocks this out of the park, generally for most of their fragrances. But now the question of, is it worth it? So I think the answer is, it depends. And I'll give 3 camps and scenarios that I would think about. If you're somebody that has loved the original, I would say you're probably 50-50 on whether or not you'll go for this. If you have a very, very vast collection and you love owning the newest fragrances and you like the original, I think it's a no-brainer. You might find it a tad bit redundant, but it still is different enough. And if you like this, it just gives you another bottle to grab every day so you don't have to pull so much from that one. So it just depends on your philosophy. If you're somebody that like this, but really are selective about your purchases and don't want any redundancy, I would say probably not going to be worth it for you, or I would just wait until maybe you get done with your full bottle and then reconsider whether or not this is the direction you want to go in. Now for the second scenario, if you're somebody that didn't like the original, would you maybe like this one? Possibly. I would say it depends on what you didn't like about the original. If you didn't like the fruity opening and you didn't like how kind of creamy and sweet it was at times, this might be more up your lane. I would say it's more about the leather, it's more about the woods. It does have a bit more just bitterness and spice off the top rather than just this juicy fruit that comes with the original. So if that was something you didn't like, then you might actually want to give this one a shot. It could be, if you like certain aspects of the original, this could very much be in your lane with the intense. And then for the final camp, say you haven't smelled either of these, which one should you go for? Well, first off, let's just say this. The differences between these are there, but they're not very extreme. And I would say if you smell one, you get the idea probably of the other for the most part. but I would probably just sample them both, give them a shot, and probably go into this understanding. This is how I interpret them if I had to sum it up very quickly. The original is going to be more about the fruits in the opening, more creamy, sweeter. The woods will come on a little bit later on and will appear as the citrus notes are going to evaporate. This one has a similar format, but you're going to find that the woods are going to surface much earlier and then is not going to be as sweet, and also will have some bitterness, spiciness in its opening compared to this juicy fruit. And then leather is going to be much more a part of the equation, and probably is going to be classified as more traditional masculine in some aspect. But both of them, absolutely love them. I'm going to wear them both. For myself, as somebody who is a huge proponent and champion of this original fragrance, this is still right up my alley. I'm still on the fence on whether or not I like this more or not. I do like them both. They are maybe a tad bit redundant for my collection, but again, I cover fragrances on a daily basis, so it's a little bit of a different scenario. But no question, very well done. I think this is probably still one of my favorites from Mancera, even outside of this. I have a ton of connection, emotional connection to the original. So safe to say, I'm a fan of the Intense version as well. But all right, guys, that is my take on Cedrat Boisé Intense. Have you smelled this one yet? And if you have, what do you think of it? Also, in comparison to the original, what is your take? Do you find many differences? Do you agree with my interpretation of how this one differs from the original? And if you had to pick one, if you've smelled them both, which one would you recommend and go for? Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that as well. Definitely check out teddybaldessar.com and our new fragrance selection. We have some world-class brands on there, curated by Courtney and myself, all authorized to sell. And it's a great way to support the content as well, so we can keep bringing you videos just like this. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and we'll see you all very soon.